Hi and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus, and it seems that big tech is in big trouble. So you may have heard a couple of these stories, but when you put them all together, you get a little bit of a different picture. So we start off with Apple. About 2 months ago, France actually fined Apple $1.1 billion for anti-competitive practices related to its sales and distribution networks. Two other smaller companies were also fined like $60 or $70 million each. And this was sort of, well, for Apple, $1.1 billion isn't a lot of money, but nevertheless, it was kind of an antitrust case, and Apple was given the fine. Now, a month before that, so 3 months ago, France also had fined Apple $25 million for the case where Apple supposedly had slowed down their iPhones with an update, and this of course was viewed as very bad. Apple of course claims, no, that's not what we were doing, blah blah blah, but the fact remains that at least France has already levied quite a few large fines against Apple for anti-competitive practices. Next we move on to Facebook. Facebook was already fined $5 billion by the FTC in 2019, and that was related to privacy problems. And there are also various antitrust investigations going on involving Facebook. Nothing has really happened just yet, but it's kind of, it's ongoing and there's been talk of it. Recently we also learned that Facebook has decided to acquire Giphy, the animated GIF service, and this of course raised alarm bells because everyone's going, oh God, Facebook is buying even more tech companies. You may remember that Facebook already owns Instagram and WhatsApp. Also, India is getting in on the action. India's antitrust watchdog is apparently looking into Facebook's practices in their country because in India, WhatsApp has a payment service and they are investigating to determine whether or not WhatsApp's payment service has an unfair competitive advantage vis-a-vis the other payment services available in India. Okay, so that's Facebook. What about Amazon, another big tech company? Well, the House Judiciary Committee recently came out and said they want Jeff Bezos to testify before Congress because, of course, they're also looking at Amazon. Now, Amazon was very happy during the whole virus lockdown because, of course, Amazon, everybody's buying stuff on Amazon. They're making lots of money. There are also antitrust investigations involving Amazon already underway. And Amazon is kind of complaining because there's this thing called JEDI, the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure Contract. This is a Department of Defense contract worth something like $10 or $11 billion for a wonderful, super-duper Department of Defense cloud computing project. That was supposed to go to Amazon, but then there was a lot of back and forth and claims of favoritism, and suddenly the JEDI contract ended up going to Microsoft. So Amazon remains bent out of shape because of that. And finally, we come to Google. Now, just the other day, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal claimed that they heard through the grapevine that the US government is going to actually charge Google with antitrust violations. Several other US states may join in the fun. I think Texas and another state at least, possibly more. And supposedly the antitrust violation charges will involve Google. They claim that Google abused its dominant position in online search to harm competitors. They also claim that these actual antitrust charges against Google, which are supposedly coming in June, just next month, will set a benchmark for more antitrust complaints against Amazon, Apple, and Facebook. So there are investigations underway for all the four main big tech companies, and this is going to be the first actual action taken. Supposedly it will be taken against Google. It will happen in June, and they're kind of hinting that, like, yeah, we're coming for Amazon and Apple and Facebook as well. Now, interestingly enough, while this is going on, several current and former Google employees claim that the whole diversity program inside Google has been sort of scaled back. Now, of course, Google denied these claims, but it's also interesting that there was another news item that pretty much no one heard about. The mainstream media barely even mentioned it, and that is that, you remember James Damore, the guy who was a Google engineer and he was fired because he had a problem with all the diversity stuff, blah, 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 Well, it turns out that Damore and 3 other former Google employees, they had a lawsuit against Google. That lawsuit about a week ago was basically dropped. Damore and these 3 other guys dropped their lawsuit against Google. And when asked about like a settlement or something, the lawyers said, no, 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 it's all classified, confidential, blah, blah, blah. So we have these rumors that Google is sort of throttling back on their diversity thing. The Damore case was sort of dropped and settled quietly. There's antitrust stuff going on. A couple mainstream outlets are saying that, yes, Google will actually be charged soon. Oh, by the way, we're also going to charge these other companies. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Interestingly enough, there are other things going on. It's kind of like, while all this stuff is going on over here, you also have sort of business as usual. And by that I mean, for example, contact tracing. You all know with the whole virus thing, they had this idea of contact tracing, and it was primarily Apple and Google said in iOS and Android, we're going to give you an app. You download the app, you put it on your smartphone, and all contact tracing does is it basically looks at your list of contacts, and anytime you're in close proximity to anyone else who has that app installed and running, it sort of exchanges your contact lists supposedly in a safe way via Bluetooth, short-range wireless connections, thereby enabling them to actually track who is near who so that they can say, okay, these people might have caught the virus, blah, 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 right? Now, the interesting thing was that not very many people are actually downloading and using this app because they're going like, really? Do you really need that? And also, Germany, for example, the German government came out and said, yeah, we don't want to do that. Specifically, what Germany said was, no, 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 no. We want to actually have a central database on our government servers where we will actually store all the information. And Google and Apple said, no, no, no. In order to protect our customers' privacy, what we're going to do is we're going to store all the data on their phones. So Google and Apple kind of tried to make it sound like the German government was being evil and wanting to, keep all the data, which is actually hilarious considering the amount of data that big tech stores on their, and obviously the reality of the situation is any data on your smartphone, it's going to be shot up into the cloud. Maybe it won't be stored on the cloud, but it's going to be shot up. At least metadata will be extracted and shot up to the cloud and processed along with everything else. So we have the antitrust stuff. We have some things possibly changing involving diversity and all that kind of thing. We have governments saying, no, 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 you're not going to be able to do this contact tracing. We don't agree with that. Then, of course, you have Apple and Google saying, right now this contact tracing thing is an optional app, but long term we're actually just going to incorporate it into our mobile operating system, so everyone will be forced to have it. Another recent thing that happened was the US Congress basically came out and voted to allow the US government to get anyone's browsing history without a warrant. That's not really that big of a deal because obviously, big tech and government and intelligence agencies have access to this sort of data all the time. But the point remains that they're sort of formalizing it and saying, yeah, that's okay. Whereas it was expected to be shot down, but it wasn't. And the point of all this is that all of this kind of stuff, like everything that the government does, contact tracing, spying, hoovering up all the data, all of this stuff happens basically with big tech's cooperation, or to put it another way, as I've mentioned previously, Google sort of was kind of in bed with intelligence agencies of various descriptions kind of since its inception. So it's like you have governments and elements of governments. Maybe it's just intelligence agencies, maybe it's this, maybe it's the DoD, maybe it's whatever. And they're actually kind of working with big tech, and big tech as private companies, they're kind of allowed to do whatever they want. And they're kind of hoovering up all this data. As I mentioned in an earlier video, you have location data brokers, where it's essentially a company that just takes your location data and sells it to the highest bidder, whoever that may happen to be. So you have this kind of mixture of like business and spying and privacy violations and antitrust practices, and they're all just kind of working together. But suddenly they're not really working together anymore. For whatever reason, you've got antitrust, you've got, no, we don't want you to spy on our people, we're going to spy on them or track them or whatever, and except they're already working together in other ways and allowing other things. So like none of it really makes any sense. It's kind of like everyone's just sort of at each other's throats, which is kind of good for you and I, because maybe if they're at each other's throats, then they'll pay less attention to us. And that brings up another point that I wanted to mention, which is face masks. Of course, there are cameras everywhere. And for example, in the UK, there are like 27 cameras per square centimeter of land area. You know, it's ridiculous. In many countries, there are cameras everywhere. And of course, I mean, you may not think about it, but come on, if there are cameras, those cameras are going to be connected to some system somewhere that has facial recognition so that people can be tracked. Duh. So then you had this whole virus, and of course we're all supposed to wear face masks. Except if we're all wearing our face mask, then how are you supposed to do facial recognition? I mean, especially if you have a face mask and a pair of sunglasses on because it's sunny outside, say goodbye to your facial recognition. So you have all these things that are sort of conflicting, and it's like shooting yourselves in the foot, and everyone's kind of at each other's throat, and it's all a bit bonkers. And of course you can say, right, antitrust violations. We already know how this is going to go. This happened before with Microsoft. They didn't really break up the company. They got a slap on the wrist monetarily. You know, in some ways they changed, in other ways they didn't really. You know, maybe they'll break Google up into a few smaller companies, but it'll just be business as usual. And I suppose, yeah, that's probably what's going to happen, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity here, because you and I alone have no real power, right? I mean, we sit here and we think, well, yeah, come on, I'm not the CEO of a giant multinational big tech company. What possible effect can I have on anything? And I think the answer to that is you have to keep in mind the effects of social media, and I mean, everyone's talking about how entire elections can be swayed by social media and certain social trends and this sort of thing. But that kind of works in both directions. You could have nefarious people of whatever description trying to influence elections or something, but you can also have normal people like you and I getting on Facebook and Twitter and social media, and even just in person talking about things. And if we were no longer afraid to actually say what we think, instead of being terrified that we're not going to be accepted, what if we actually were to start speaking our mind in a sort of calm and respectful way, because obviously we're not going to agree with each other all the time. Up until now, there's been this sort of thing where it's like you have some idea, and if that guy disagrees with you, well, then I'm gonna get all mad, and he's gonna get all mad, and it's possible to actually speak your mind without going totally crazy. So anyway, you and I alone may not actually have that much of an effect, but consider what happens if, say, an antitrust suit is brought against Amazon, right? And say a couple 100 million of us get on Twitter and Facebook or whatever, and we say, look, we're pretty pissed off at Amazon too, because they're killing small businesses. Amazon goes in, they see a product that sells well, it's being manufactured and sold by a small or medium-sized business, they replicate that product, sell it for less money, produce it in volume, and that small or medium-sized business goes out of business because Amazon. What if several 100 million of us were to get on social media and start talking about that and saying, this is what really pisses us off? That's kind of a social trend. And of course, we know that all of this social data, social networking and all of this stuff, it's being monitored. All of this data is being hoovered up. And one of the things that is being tracked is what are people feeling? What are they thinking? How are they thinking? What are their opinions about certain things? So if you and I and 10 or 100, several 100 million other people actually get out there and speak our minds, then we can actually have an effect on what happens, because those social trends are monitored, and it may actually make a difference. The same thing with 5G. I've talked about 5G a lot. When the whole virus thing was happening, suddenly people were going around and they were burning down 5G towers. That's not how you do it. You don't go and it's like, look, if you're a bad guy, you can go and you can burn things down and you can get away with it. If you're you or me, we go out and do the same thing, and we go to jail. And then what are you going to do? What good does that do? You have a voice. So you have to use it, and you have to share things, and you have to get it all out there. Most importantly, let your voice be heard, because maybe you have actually a little bit more power than you think. Because there's only one CEO of Google, but there are billions of us. So, and this is kind of an opportune moment because you've got different arms of government, you've got different arms of private corporations, big tech, blah, 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 and they're all just kind of, it's like chaos right now. It's all starting to, this chunk is battling that chunk, and that one's battling this one, and they're all kind of at each other's throats. And so, yeah, in some sense, it's business as usual. Yeah, we're just going to keep spying on them better and better. But in another sense, you have this sort of this mixture of events where we don't actually know how it's going to come out. And yeah, they may just take Google, break it up into a few companies, and it may be business as usual. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity, if enough of us speak up, to actually maybe effect some positive change. And that's pretty much the only way that we're going to do it. So, am I holding my breath? Yeah, actually I am holding my breath a little bit. And we'll see what happens. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.